Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, and this is a show where we hang out, we talk about beauty, we talk about beauty as it relates to games. And today I am going to talk about Mark. You will be missed, sir. Grob, good to see you. Today I'm talking about a game that I ran years ago. Probably, sadly, if I were to do the math, probably 15 years ago, so 2008, 2009. And I think it's always valuable to go back and look at our previous games, what went really well, what did not go really well. John Doom, good to see you. Grom and John, I hope you're enjoying our combat in our play-by-post on the Iconic Production channel. And looking forward to seeing how this all shakes out. So, the reason I want to talk about this is because we talked about GM burnout. And when I was really thinking about it, this was really the last time I suffered GM burnout. And I was running this game it was a game of Shadowrun 4th edition. And at the start of it, I had high hopes. I was bright-eyed and ready to just run the crap out of a game. And by the end of it, I did not want to run a game ever again. Now, granted, I obviously am still running games, but this was interesting for me. This was the last time I really suffered from what I would call major GM burnout. So our gaming group had gotten far too large. And when I say far too large, I mean far too large. For the longest time, we had 2 games meeting at the same time at my buddy Bob's house. Basically every other week. I'd run a game one week for one group with Bob kind of being the overlap, and then I'd run a second game the following week. And that went on for a while. We did the Serenity and Exalted. So we did Serenity one week, Exalted the next week with slightly different groups. And as we were playing, we kind of really enjoyed all of the groups. And we got this idea, hey, let's run this massive Burning Wheel game. But we're going to run it with 2 GMs. I think at that point, the group was up to about 14 people. Or 12 people. So each group had 5 to 6 players in it. And that game ran for several years. And that game was amazing. A buddy Mike started the other group. He backed out. We got a brand new... Bob actually finished the Burning Wheel game. And then my good friend Christopher and Mark were each running a game. And they were running, Mark was running D20 Modern, doing Fallout. And Chris ran his Star Wars game, which I've talked about several times on the show. And there were some people who were leaving the group. We were calling the herd a little bit, and I got this idea that I wanted to run a Shadowrun game. And I wanted to do it as a thank you to Mark, because Mark had just run this amazing modern D20 modern game that my wife Trish had played in, and she loved every second of that game. So I'm like, I'm going to run a Shadowrun game. Now, my goals were ambitious. We had 8 to 9 players for Shadowrun 4th edition, and that is an incredibly complex and crunchy rule set. I wanted to update Harlequin and Harlequin's Back from 2nd and 3rd edition, I believe, to 4th edition. I think they're actually 2nd edition Shadowrun modules. I loved the Harlequin and Harlequin's Back modules. They follow this immortal elf. Harlequin is about this ritual of like contest or dispute that he's in with another immortal elf by the name of Aran the Scribe. And so he's like targeting different parts of Aran using the Shadowrunners, doing these very formalized and very ritualized targeting of things that are important to Aran in one way or the other. And then Harlequin's Back brings Harlequin back. But this was an adventure that kind of set up the link between Earthdawn and Shadowrun. The idea that, hey, the metaplanes exist, and the horrors, the demonic creatures that almost ended life on Earth once, they're starting to come back, and they're coming back sooner than expected for some reason. So I was going to run those, and then I was like, wow, I will come up with kind of an overarching plot. And so I had this AI that was targeting, it was the Shadowrun 4th edition was the first one that went wireless with a lot of the technologies. So I had this AI and a drug called Silverline. So basically Silverline looked like a magic marker, and you could draw silver tattoos on yourself, and it would get you high and make you hallucinate. And essentially what was going on is the AI was body jacking you. They were nanite tattoos, and the AI would get to body jack you for a bit. And there was always a chance, and an increase the more you use it, that those nanites would form a little nanite hive somewhere in your body and keep producing more nanites so that you became a sleeper agent for the AI. And this was right about the time that I was really getting into narrative games, and White Wolf was kind of seeing a resurgence. And so when people started giving me backgrounds, I was like, well, okay, in addition to all of this, I'm going to try and tie everyone's backgrounds into these. So Bob's character was this former CIA agent whose best friend and wife were killed on a mission, and he was trying to figure out who was doing, who had done this so that he could get his revenge. And my wife Trisha's character decided on a whim that she was head over heels in love with Bob's character and was going to do anything to prove to Bob's character that she was the one he was supposed to be with. I had several people who took amnesia and then were just like, nah, I don't care, just do whatever you want with it. So they became clones from Aztechnology, which plays into the end of the story. So everyone had their own unique subplot, as well as 3 main plots and 1 overarching main plot. Now, I knew this was going to be a tough game to run. I'm not dumb. I've run a lot of games at that point, and I knew Shadowrun was a very crunchy system. And so I offloaded a lot of what I could. I kept the magic rules at the forefront of my knowledge because I liked playing mages. So when my buddy was playing his druggy troll shaman, I knew how to summon spirits and how magic worked. My friend Calvin was playing the hacker, so I was like, all right, Calvin, I want you to know the hacking rules. When I have a question, I want to be able to ask you about how hacking goes. And that was awesome because that allowed Calvin to really dig into that component of the rules that he liked, as well as kind of being my neutral rules arbiter for hacking things. I did the similar things with combat rules. Like Mark and Chris had the detailed combat rules. But again, 8 to 9 players, each with their own sub-story, each threading and tying in to a lot. And I began to dread this game. And I was hitting burnout. And so I finally, after talking with my buddy Calvin, who loved this game, but he was like, listen, nobody wants you to get angry and quit. If you need to wrap it up, and we'll play something else. So I announced to the party, hey, I've got about 4 to 6 weeks left in this campaign. It's very stressful for me to run this game for you every week, and there's a lot of you, and it's a very complex game, and so I'm gonna start wrapping up the game. What I didn't realize is that my dice were listening. And that night, the game came to a sudden and abrupt end. One of the players discovered she was a clone, and in this moment of existential crisis, she was the driver of the van that had all of the party in it as they were trying to stop this reoccurring NPC from taking off. And this NPC, La Chasseur, had mined the area around the plane so that he could take off in safety and no one could approach the runway. Well, this character, in a fit of existential ennui, as I said, was like, screw it. I can get us there. What does it matter anyway? So after the burning wreckage of the van hit and the players stumbled out because she did not make her roll, they were like, well, let's kill La Chasseur. And every time I threw dice, I had so many successes that, like, just people started dying left and right. I still remember Calvin attempting to pull a companion out of the burning wreckage of the vehicle, and I was like, oh, well, I'll throw a knife at Calvin. And I got something absurd like 18 successes, and Calvin failed his soak roll, and so the knife took him in the throat and, killed him instantly. And there were some harsh feelings on both sides for a while, because I got accused of just throwing the game because I didn't want to continue with it, which I thought was unfair. I try to always roll my dice in the open, so it was not like these rolls were hidden. But it was a bitter moment in my life for a very long time. Kind of a point of contention between us and some of my friends. And I didn't quit the gaming group, but I quit running games for probably a year and a half. So I thought I'd do a post-mortem, now here's the thing, there was a lot of great things in that game. The fact that nobody picked up that the Irish smugglers were all vampires. And when Bob went to find out what happened to his wife and it was a trap and he was killed, my wife blamed herself and so knew this Irish mobster was always sweet on her, so decided to spend the night with him. And I asked a very simple question. I said, was there biting? And the answer was there was always biting. It's like, well, cool. So if you're unfamiliar with Shadowrun, vampirism is a body fluid transmitted disease called the human metahuman vampiric virus. And so my wife, over several sessions, painfully expelled her cyberware as the vampiric virus grew her new body parts. My buddy Chris accidentally got exposed to Silverline and critically failed his first roll to see if the nanite hive formed. And so I would start each new arc with, what are you doing, Bob? What are you doing, Mark? What are you doing, Stephanie? What are you doing, Kyle? Christopher, your character wakes up covered in blood with no ammo in a dumpster in an alley somewhere. What do you do? And for months, Chris never told anyone that he was having these blackouts, waking up covered in blood. And so the group goes to take on Silverline, the AI, and Mark calls in an airstrike. And excuse me. Christopher unloads his fully automatic weapon into his dad's character's back, killing him instantly. Like, there were really good moments. So, some positive things. If you have a complicated game system, or a lot of people, offload some of that complexity to your players. You're going to have players who are veterans of the game or who are very excited about the game. Give them a rule set to really dig into to help you as sort of an assistant GM. This was wonderful. I was able to constantly ask Mark, hey, tactically, how does this work? What's the best way to use this ability? Calvin, this hacker's attacking the group. How does this work? Because if you've played Shadowrun, you know there's a lot of subsystems in that. And that was wonderful. I think you could use this in Savage Worlds super easily. Like the one player who really enjoys all of the tests that you can do, or wild attacks or desperate attacks, or what the bonus or penalty is for cover. Like, lean into the players that know the rule system as well, if not better than you. Put them to use. That was something that I carried forward from that day. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a really good complex story. But I think that was the source of my burnout. I think trying to come to the table with this massive plot with all of these subplots constantly tying players' characters into it and going forward. I think that's the reason I burned out, and also the reason that I now run games the way I do. But let's jump over here to Knights of the Smith Dinner Table. Recording and producing actual play pushes you real close to burnout. Yeah, I empathize with that, James. Tink reminded me that before the incident last year, I was getting real close to burnout with the actual plays as well. They're a lot more work. They just are. And there's joy in them, as James said, but there is a difference, especially if you're running them live, where you have a chat interacting with you. The goal to always be on or always be entertaining is a burden that no GM really needs to have put on them. I think that's one of the reasons that I shifted in my mentality. And since then, like I said, I've gone about 15 years where I've been running multiple games a week. No burnout. So I think the idea of trying to pull all of those threads together, I would have been better served trying to write a cyberpunk story than run that as a role-playing game. Because while my players were fully invested and engaged, and it was wonderful, and they were really enjoying the story, that constant desire to make sure I don't make plot holes or contradict things or making sure everyone has enough time in the spotlight, I was taking on the burden of the whole campaign, plot, fun, entertainment, on myself. And after 18 months, it was too much to bear. I cracked under the strain. People gave me 2 or 3 pages of backstory that I felt obligated to tie in. And I was. Like, I'll be honest, I asked for good backstories from everybody. Again, because this was kind of vogue at the time. I think since then I've moved to what's really more important is not the story that you bring to the table, players, or the story that I, the GM, brings to the table in my lore or my background, but the story that we developed together going forward. I think keeping that in mind, keeping in mind that as the GM, it's my job to provide a place where fun can be had, and that we're telling this story together, is what keeps me far more engaged and far more rejuvenated when I play and run games now. Now when I get done with the game, I'm buzzed and up for the next, hour to 2 hours because I'm so excited because of what happened. As opposed to that game where I would get into the car exhausted and drive home and pass out. I'm not saying if you like to run narrative games that it's necessarily a bad thing. But I think that especially over the last 5 to 10 years, we have put on the DM or the GM far more work than really is necessary, and far more expectations that are humanly possible. I think one of the things is the rise of APs really present and I'm not calling out anyone's APs. This is just my personalized thing. I think APs can be a great way to learn a game, to try out a game, to see how it works before you play, or it just is entertainment. But if you're not careful, they are very similar to other forms of social media in the fact that people can be critical without being engaged, but also because they can present a idealized view of the game that only the people who are actually involved actually know how real or difficult that is to present. There's conversations going on Twitter right now because some GM quit sold all her books because some guy, they're calling him Jason, basically was like, you're not good enough to GM this table because I've played with professional dungeon masters and they're way better than you. First of all, screw that guy. But second of all, this is what I'm talking about, the burden placed on dungeon masters. As opposed to somebody who gets to sit down and create the story with you, the modern trend is that a GM has to be an actor and a director and an author and a therapist and all of these different hats. That's my main takeaway from Shadowrun. Less is more. My players enjoy the table because they're creating the story in the same way that I am, and I'm working with them. I think, here's the thing, I love the Dragonlance novels. I think the Dragonlance modules were probably one of the worst things to happen to gaming. This idea that we're going to play through an arc from start to finish, or not just a module, not just a small adventure, but a full campaign, fully realized before we even sit down from 1 to 20. And I love those adventures. I have them. But we've seen this shift over more and more into this, hey, here's your start to finish. People talk about, like there was a conversation on Reddit that I just read this month. Like, when do you guys start your game? How far do you have it written before you start your campaign? And, like, an honest question from a new DM of, well, can I start now? I've only got the thing halfway written, or should I write the whole thing out? And I'm like, you shouldn't be that far prepped. Like, prep for what's immediate and allow the story to develop. And this is on GMs as well as players. Like, I know a lot of GMs are like, I won't read anyone's backstory because their backstory isn't important. But what I want is you to read this 12-page history of my world. It's the same impulse, man. It's the same impulse. If you're not willing to read a backstory and incorporate it, don't expect your players to be willing to read your lore and incorporate it. But again, anything more than a page, 2 pages at the outside, it's more than enough. So Grom says, so first of all, Tink and John Doom have been mocking Alan Darian. I'm sorry. I would really like to take this criticism under advisement, but we need a quorum, and I only see 3 hands raised on that side of the argument. James says the dice really tried hard to kill Rihanna last night. Yeah, I mean, that can happen. Grom has reached burnout with genres, but not as a GM in general. Yes, I would agree. Genre burnout is real. There are some of us who have our favorite genres, and that's never going to... We'll just keep approaching them from different directions. But I've hit the point where this sort of grim, dark vein of storytelling, I'm getting over that. I want to go back to something heroic. Yeah, Grom, that guy Jason, what a tool. I don't know who he is. I hope it's not his real name because it's always been put in quotes. But seriously, what the hell? Jason, if this is you and you are listening somehow on the interwebs, most people in this hobby agree to be a DM initially because no one else wants to do it, or they do it because they love the idea of the genre gaming so much that they're willing to put themselves out there. And it is a scary, it is a difficult, and it is a very rewarding experience. And for you to compare them to a professional DM or even somebody who's been doing it for years, 1, is horrible. 2, those are inside thoughts. Used to be that we learned if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. That's an adage that you need to learn. And 3, why don't you step up and run a game? Because to say that to somebody is cruel, petty, and small. Players, remember that if you get together to play in a game that your friend is running, you may spend 2, 4, 6, 8 hours playing, but know that they're spending far more than that reading books, being on forums, interacting with people, writing, plotting, thinking about how to make your game more enjoyable. More hours than we can tally. Respect that and give them a little grace. Buy them a cup of coffee. When GM Day rolls around, get them something nice and drive through RPG. Because, in all honesty, the heavy lifting of a campaign, both mentally and financially, tends to fall on the shoulders of a GM. That Shadowrun game was also one of the first games where I was like, hey, if you guys want me to get a book for Shadowrun, I'll grab it, but I'm going to need you guys to help pitch in for it. Because there were a lot of books coming out for it, and people wanted the gear books at the table, and they wanted the magic books at the table. I just couldn't grab all of the books. But GMs, you would be surprised if you say, hey, can you guys pitch in to help me get this next campaign book or this thing for the table? Some of your players can't, which is fine. Some of your players won't, which is okay. And some of them are going to surprise you. So, yeah. So, James, I don't know that I necessarily blame Critical Role, but they are part of that high gloss actual play. I don't think Mercer and crew, especially in Campaign 1, were doing anything but playing a wonderful D&D game. But they have the polish and they have the skills to make it one of the best iterations for their version of D&D. I kind of look at it as, again, like Instagram, right? These are the best of the best pictures that we have in our lives. And the fact that Mercer and crew can deliver, or hell, the fact that the Knights of the Smith Dinner Table can deliver just great APs week after week, that's not nothing. But to assume that every game you will ever play in is going to have that quality of polish, this is an exception that proves the rule. Like, I've told people who have had players who sat down saying, listen, like, I really love Critical Role, so I hope you're as good as Mercer. My response is, well, cool, you better be as good as Sam Riegel or you can leave the table. Everyone thinks their GM needs to be as good as Matt Mercer or Matt Colville or James from Knights of the Smith Dinner Table. But no one stops to think, where am I on the player side? Am I as focused, as committed, as invested as the players in those APs? Because honestly, it's not. It's a sense of entitlement that I just want to show up and I want to play in something as beautiful as what I see produced. Beauty is earned in gaming. Well, yeah, Grom, that's a great way to do that. For Grom, for Pathfinder or D&D, if you want something from a book in a game, buy the book, and he allows it. Great option. So we'll be back Thursday. We're going to hang out. We're going to talk about when bad things happen to good characters. We're going to talk about not player death. We're talking about character death. Player death is a very sad thing. If we need to do an episode on that, we will. But I'm talking about character death, which is apropos because in the kids game that I run up at Madness, we had our first death, and it was definitely one of the kids decided that the best way to fight a frost giant was to crawl into their mouth, slide down their throat, cast grease in their stomach, and then set it on fire. I'll let you figure out what went wrong with that plan. And we'll be back on Thursday to talk about that. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been Behind the Screen, and I will see you all on Thursday. Until then, have a good one, everybody.